Jake Morrison woke up every morning at 5:30 sharp, not because of an alarm clock, but because his body had learned this rhythm over the past 8 years. The old wooden floors of his ranch house creaked under his boots as he made his way to the kitchen, where he'd put on a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Outside his window, the Montana sky was still dark, painted with stars that city folks never got to see. His border collie Ranger was already waiting by the back door, tail wagging with the kind of excitement that only dogs seem to have for daily routines. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears and smiled. "Morning, buddy. Ready for another day?" Ranger barked once, which Jake had learned meant yes in dog language, the double M. Ranch had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations. Jake's grandfather had started it with nothing but determination and a stubborn streak wider than the Montana horizon. His father had built it into something respectable, raising quality cattle and earning the trust of neighboring ranchers. Now it was Jake's turn, and some days he wondered if he was doing right by his family's legacy. 2,000 acres stretched out in every direction from his front porch. Rolling hills covered in grass that turned golden in the summer and white in the winter. Mountains rose up in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks touching the clouds on good days. It was beautiful country, the kind that made your chest tight with pride just looking at it. But it was also lonely country. Jake pulled on his worn leather jacket and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. February in Montana was no joke. The cold hit his face like a slap, making his eyes water. His breath came out in white puffs that disappeared into the darkness. The thermometer by his door read 15 below zero, which was actually warm for this time of year. His first stop was always the barn, where 12 horses waited for their morning hay. They nickered softly when they heard his footsteps, their warm breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Jake had names for each of them, and he talked to them like old friends while he filled their feeders. There was Thunder, a black stallion with an attitude problem. Belle, a gentle mare who loved to have her nose rubbed. Chief, an old paint horse who had been his father's favorite. "How's everyone this morning?" Jake asked as he threw hay into their stalls. "Cold enough for you." "Yeah, me too." After the horses came the cattle. Jake climbed onto his four-wheeler and rode out to check the herd, Ranger running alongside. 500 head of Angus cattle dotted the landscape, their dark shapes moving slowly through the snow-covered pasture. He counted them automatically, looking for any signs of trouble. A sick cow could mean big problems, and out here, the nearest veterinarian was an hour away on a good day. The water troughs had frozen overnight, as they did every winter morning. Jake used an axe to break the ice, the sound echoing across the quiet ranch. The cattle gathered around, grateful for the fresh water. Steam rose from their nostrils as they drank, and their hooves made soft crunching sounds in the snow. By the time Jake finished his morning chores, the sun was just starting to peek over the mountains. Golden light spread across the valley, turning the snow into millions of tiny diamonds. It was moments like these that reminded him why he stayed, why he chose this hard life over the easy path his high school friends had taken. His best friend, Tommy, had moved to Denver right after graduation. He worked in an office now, wore suits every day, and complained about traffic on social media. His girlfriend Lisa had gone to college in California and never came back. She was married to some guy who sold insurance and had 2 kids Jake had never met. One by one, everyone he had grown up with had left the valley, chasing dreams in cities that never slept. Jake understood why they left. Ranch life wasn't for everyone. The work was hard, the hours were long, and the pay was unpredictable. Some years were good, when beef prices were high and the weather cooperated. Other years, like the drought 3 summers ago, tested every ounce of determination a person had. But this land was in his blood. His grandfather used to say that some men were meant to roam, and others were meant to stay and tend the earth. Jake was definitely a tender. The nearest neighbor was Tom Bradley, who lived 12 miles down the valley road. Tom was in his 70s now, and his arthritis kept him from visiting much during the winter months. They'd wave to each other at the monthly cattle auction in town, maybe share a beer, and talk about the weather or cattle prices, but deep conversations were rare. Ranch folks tended to keep their feelings close to their chest. Town was 40 minutes away if the roads were good, which they often weren't in winter. Millerville had a population of 800 on a busy day. It had one grocery store, one gas station, 2 churches, and a diner that served the best apple pie in 3 counties. Jake went to town twice a month for supplies, and that was about all the human contact he had besides the feed store clerk and the cashier at the grocery store. Some evenings, after a long day of fixing fences or moving cattle, Jake would sit on his front porch with a cup of coffee and wonder what it would be like to have someone to share all this with. He'd imagine coming home to the smell of dinner cooking or having someone to talk to about the crazy calf that had been born that morning, or just sitting together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He'd tried dating a few times over the years. There was Carol, a teacher from town who seemed nice enough, but she made it clear that she expected him to sell the ranch and move somewhere more civilized. There was Diana, who he'd met at a cousin's wedding. She visited the ranch once, took one look at the isolation and the hard work, and never called again. After a while, Jake stopped trying. It seemed like the kind of life he'd chosen and the kind of woman who might want to share it were 2 things that just didn't exist in the same universe. His evenings followed the same pattern as his mornings. Feed the animals, check the equipment, eat a simple dinner while watching the news, and then maybe read a book or work on paperwork until bedtime. Ranger was always there, a loyal companion who never judged and never asked for more than food, water, and the occasional belly rub. Jake had grown comfortable with the silence. At first, after his father passed away, the quiet had been overwhelming. He'd turn on the radio just to hear human voices or call his cousin in Texas just to have someone to talk to. But gradually the silence became familiar, then comforting. He learned to hear things that city people never noticed: the wind through the grass, the sound of cattle moving in the distance, the call of hawks circling overhead. Winter was always the hardest time. The days were short, the work was brutal, and the isolation felt heavier somehow. But Jake had made his peace with it. This was his life, his choice, his responsibility. He was the last Morrison on the Double M Ranch, and he intended to keep it that way until the day he died. He just never imagined that one cold February morning, everything he thought he knew about his solitary life was about to change forever. Jake was halfway through his second cup of coffee when he heard it, a sound that made him freeze with the mug halfway to his lips. The rumble of a car engine, struggling and coughing, coming up his dirt road. In 8 years of living alone on the ranch, unexpected visitors were rarer than hen's teeth. The UPS truck came once a month, maybe twice. The propane delivery guy showed up when Jake called him. Other than that, nobody had any reason to drive the 12 miles of rough road that led to his front door. Ranger heard it too. The dog's ears perked up, and he let out a low whine that meant something wasn't right in his world. Jake set down his coffee and walked to the kitchen window, pushing aside the faded blue curtains his mother had hung there 20 years ago. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. A small car was limping up his driveway, smoke or steam pouring from under its hood. The engine sounded like it was about to give up the ghost, making noises that no healthy car should ever make. Jake watched as the vehicle lurched to a stop about 30 feet from his front porch, right next to the old wooden fence post that marked where his yard began. For a moment, nothing happened. The engine ticked and hissed as it cooled down, and Jake found himself holding his breath. Then the driver's door creaked open, and out stepped someone who looked like they'd just stepped out of a magazine. Even though they were clearly in trouble, it was a young woman with the kind of long, dark hair that caught the morning light like silk. She was wearing jeans and a thin jacket that wouldn't keep a person warm in a Montana spring, let alone a February morning when the temperature was still sitting at 10 below zero. Jake could see her breath coming out in white puffs, and even from his kitchen window he could tell she was shivering. She stood there for a moment, looking around like she wasn't sure where she was or what she was supposed to do next. Her car made one final wheeze and then went completely silent. Steam continued to rise from under the hood, and Jake realized that whatever had brought her here, she wasn't going anywhere anytime soon in that vehicle. The woman took a few steps toward his house, and that's when Jake noticed something was seriously wrong. She was walking like someone who was running on empty, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just being tired. Her steps were uneven, and she kept putting her hand out like she was trying to steady herself on invisible walls. Jake was already moving toward his front door when it happened. The woman took another step, stumbled, and then simply collapsed. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, but the way people fall when their bodies just can't carry them anymore. She went down to her knees right there on his wooden porch, her hands hitting the boards with a sound that made Jake's chest tighten. He didn't think, he just reacted. Jake threw open his front door so hard it banged against the wall and rushed outside into the bitter cold without even grabbing his jacket. The woman was on her hands and knees now, her long hair hanging down like a curtain around her face. She was making soft sounds, not quite crying, not quite talking, just the kind of noises people make when they're at the very end of their rope. "Hey. Hey there," Jake said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "You okay? What's wrong?" She looked up at him then, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the darkest brown he'd ever seen, but they were also filled with a kind of desperation that made him want to fix whatever was wrong right now, this minute. Her lips had a bluish tint that Jake recognized from his years of dealing with Montana winters. She was hypothermic or close to it. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse like she'd been driving with the windows down for hours. "I need help. I don't have anywhere else to go." That's when Jake noticed her hands. They were shaking so badly she could barely keep herself upright, and her fingers looked like they were turning white at the tips. Frostbite. This woman was in serious trouble. Okay, let's get you inside," Jake said, reaching down to help her up. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs gave out again. Without hesitation, Jake scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, and she felt cold even through her clothes. She didn't protest, just let her head fall against his shoulder, like she was too tired to care about proper manners or stranger danger. Jake carried her through his front door and straight to the living room, where the wood stove had been throwing heat all morning. He set her down gently on his old leather couch, the one his father had bought back when Jake was in high school. She immediately curled up into a ball, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping her arms around herself. "Ranger, go lay down," Jake commanded, and his dog obeyed, though he kept watching the stranger with curious eyes from his spot by the fireplace. Jake grabbed the wool blanket from the back of his recliner and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. She was still shivering, but she managed to look up at him with those dark eyes. "Thank you," she said, and Jake could hear relief in her voice. "I'm sorry. I know this is crazy. I know you don't know me, but I saw your mailbox and I just I couldn't drive anymore." "Don't worry about that right now," Jake said. "Let's get you warmed up first." "How long have you been driving in this cold?" She thought about it for a moment, like the question was harder than it should be. "Since yesterday afternoon, I think. Maybe longer, I lost track." Jake felt his eyebrows go up. Driving for 18 hours or more in this weather, in a car that was clearly not up to the task, wearing clothes that wouldn't keep a person warm in a grocery store freezer. This woman was lucky to be alive. "What's your name?" he asked, settling into his recliner so he wouldn't loom over her. "Maria," she said, "Maria Santos. And you're probably wondering what the heck I'm doing on your doorstep at 7 in the morning. Jake almost smiled at that. The thought had crossed my mind. "But first, let's make sure you're okay. Are you hurt anywhere? Besides being cold, I mean." Maria shook her head, then seemed to think better of it. "Just tired, really, really tired." And scared. She looked around his living room, taking in the simple furniture, the family photos on the mantel, the stack of ranch magazines on the coffee table. "This is a nice place. Feel safe." "It is safe," Jake said, and he meant it. "Nobody's going to bother you here." "But Maria, I need to ask, are you in some kind of trouble?" "Is someone after you?" The way her face changed told him everything he needed to know. The relief disappeared, replaced by fear so raw it made Jake's protective instincts kick into high gear. "Yes," she whispered. and I don't know what to do about it. Maria slept for 16 hours straight. Jake checked on her every few hours, making sure she was still breathing and that the color was coming back to her face. He'd moved her to the guest bedroom after she'd dozed off on the couch, carrying her carefully so he wouldn't wake her. She looked so young when she slept, like someone's little sister who'd gotten lost on her way home from school. When she finally woke up, it was evening again. Jake was in the kitchen making a simple dinner of beef stew and cornbread when he heard her moving around upstairs. He'd left some of his old clothes outside her door earlier, things that would be too big, but at least clean and warm. A few minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing his old flannel shirt and a pair of his jeans rolled up at the cuffs. "Smells good in here," she said, and her voice sounded stronger than it had that morning. "Just stew," Jake said, stirring the pot. "Nothing fancy. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but better." She sat down at his kitchen table, the same one his parents had eaten at for 30 years. "Jake, I owe you an explanation." He turned to look at her. In the warm light of his kitchen, with some rest and food in her system, he could see that she was probably around 26 or 27. Pretty didn't even begin to cover it. She had the kind of face that made you want to trust her, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of hard experience. "You don't owe me anything," Jake said, "but if you want to talk, I'm listening." Maria took a deep breath like she was preparing to jump off a cliff. "I'm from Phoenix. I was in nursing school, had 2 years left to finish my degree. I thought I had my whole life figured out, you know. I was going to be a nurse, maybe work in a small town somewhere, help people who really needed it." Jake ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one in front of her. She wrapped her hands around the warm bowl like it was precious. "I met this guy, Vincent. He was charming, handsome, everything a 24-year-old girl thinks she wants. He had money, drove a nice car, always knew the right things to say." She took a spoonful of stew and closed her eyes. "This is really good, by the way." "Thanks. What happened with Vincent?" Maria's expression darkened. "At first, everything was perfect. He'd take me to nice restaurants, buy me gifts, tell me I was beautiful. But then little things started to change. He'd get jealous if I talked to other guys in my classes. He'd show up at my job without calling first. He started making comments about my friends, saying they were bad influences." Jake had heard this story before, or versions of it. His cousin Amy had dated a guy like that when she was in college. It never ended well. "I should have seen the signs," Maria continued. "But when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to recognize what's happening. He was so good at making me feel like I was the problem, like I was too sensitive, too jealous, too demanding." "It's not your fault," Jake said quietly. "I know that now, but it took me a long time to figure it out." She ate another spoonful of stew, and Jake could see her gathering courage to continue. "Things got worse. He started following me to school, checking my phone, telling me what I could and couldn't wear. When I tried to break up with him, he'd show up at my apartment crying, saying he'd change, that he couldn't live without me." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He'd never understood men who treated women like possessions. The final straw came 3 weeks ago. I found out that Vincent wasn't just some successful businessman like he'd told me. He was involved in some really bad stuff. Drug dealing, money laundering, things that could get people killed. When I confronted him about it, he lost it completely. Maria pushed her hair back from her face, and Jake saw a faint yellow bruise on her cheek that makeup couldn't quite hide. "He told me I knew too much, that I was in it now whether I liked it or not. He said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I disappeared, and Jake, the way he said it, I knew he meant it." Jake set down his spoon. "So you ran." "I took what money I had, packed a bag, and left in the middle of the night. I've been driving for 3 days, staying in cheap motels, paying cash for everything. I threw my phone away in New Mexico because I was afraid he could track it." She looked up at him with those dark eyes. "I know this sounds crazy, but I was just driving, trying to get as far away as possible, and then my car started overheating. When I saw your mailbox, it felt like a sign." "You did the right thing," Jake said. Getting away from someone like that takes courage. Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't feel very courageous. I feel like a coward who ran away from her problems. Running away from danger isn't cowardly, it's smart. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Jake found himself studying her face, the way she held her spoon, the careful way she moved like she was still expecting someone to hurt her. It made something protective wake up in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. What were you planning to do? He asked. I mean, after you got away? I don't know, Maria admitted. I have a little money saved up, but not much. I was thinking maybe I could find work somewhere, start over. Finish nursing school eventually, if I could figure out how to do it safely. You could stay here, Jake said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I mean, temporarily. Until you figure things out, Maria looked up at him, surprised. Jake, I can't ask you to do that. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said. I know you're in trouble through no fault of your own. I know you're a long way from home with nowhere to go. And I know this ranch is big enough for 2 people. What would I do? I can't just live here for free. Jake thought about it. Can you cook? Better than you, I'm guessing, Maria said with the first real smile he'd seen from her. That's not saying much. Can you handle animals? I grew up around horses. My grandfather had a small ranch outside Tucson before he passed away. Then you can earn your keep. I could use the help, honestly. Especially with someone who knows their way around a kitchen. Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Jake could see her thinking it through. Vincent is persistent, she said finally. If he finds out where I am, he won't just go away. He'll come here, and he'll bring trouble with him. Let me worry about that, Jake said. This ranch is 12 miles from the nearest neighbor and 40 miles from town. If anyone comes looking for trouble, they'll have to get through me first. Why would you do this for a stranger? Jake considered the question. Why was he willing to help this woman he'd known for less than 24 hours? Maybe it was because he recognized something in her that reminded him of himself, the way she'd been hurt by people who were supposed to care about her. Maybe it was because he'd been alone for so long that having another person in his house felt like waking up from a dream he hadn't realized he was having. Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said finally. And because this place has been too quiet for too long. Maria smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Okay, she said, but just until I can figure out what to do next. Deal. Jake said, though something in his heart was already hoping that next would take a very long time to arrive. 3 weeks passed like a beautiful dream Jake never wanted to wake up from. Maria settled into ranch life easier than he'd ever imagined possible. She was up every morning at dawn, helping with the animals like she'd been born to it. Her grandfather's small ranch in Arizona had taught her well. She moved around horses with the kind of quiet confidence that took most people years to develop. The first morning she'd insisted on helping with chores, Jake had been nervous. He was used to doing everything himself, and he worried about her getting hurt. But Maria had walked straight up to Thunder, the black stallion with the attitude problem, and somehow managed to get a halter on him without getting bitten. Even. Jake struggled with that horse sometimes. How did you do that? He'd asked, watching Thunder actually stand still while she brushed him down. Grandfather always said horses can smell fear and anger from a mile away, Maria had replied, running her hand along Thunder's neck. But they can also smell kindness. This one's just been waiting for someone to be patient with him. Jake had watched her work with the animals and felt something shift in his chest. For 8 years he'd talked to his horses and cattle like they were his only friends because they were. But watching Maria laugh when the calves tried to suck on her fingers, or seeing her scratch behind Belle's ears while humming softly, made him realize how much he'd been missing. The ranch house came alive in ways Jake had forgotten were possible. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen most mornings. Maria had found his mother's old cookbook and was working her way through recipes that hadn't been made in this house for 20 years. She'd organized his chaotic pantry, fixed the loose handle on the coffee pot, and somehow made the living room feel warmer just by arranging the furniture differently. Evenings were The best part. After the day's work was done, they'd sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Maria told him stories about nursing school, about the patients she'd worked with during her clinical rotations. She had a way of describing people that made Jake feel like he knew them. The elderly man who flirted with all the nurses, the young mother who was scared about her first baby. "I miss it," she said one night, staring into the flames. "I know that sounds crazy after everything that happened, but I really loved helping people. There's something special about being there when someone needs you most." "It doesn't sound crazy at all," Jake said. "That's how I feel about this place. Even when it's hard, even when I'm tired and frustrated, I can't imagine doing anything else." They talked about his parents, about the legacy they'd left him. Maria understood in a way that surprised him. She knew what it meant to carry on something bigger than yourself, to feel responsible for honoring the people who came before you. "Your father would be proud," she said, after he'd told her about the drought 3 years ago, about how he'd almost lost everything but managed to hold on. "This place is beautiful, Jake. You've taken good care of it." One evening, about 2 weeks after she'd arrived, they were sitting on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. It was warmer than usual for March, and Maria had convinced Jake to bring their coffee outside. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice quiet. "Sure. Why haven't you ever gotten married? I mean, you're a good man, you have this amazing place, you're—" She paused, and Jake could see her cheeks turn pink in the fading light. "You're not hard to look at." Jake felt his own face get warm. "Just never found the right person, I guess. Most women who meet me figure out pretty quick that ranch life isn't what they want." "Their loss," Maria said simply, and something in her tone made Jake's heart skip. That was the night he realized he was falling in love with her. Not just attracted to her, not just grateful for her company, but really and truly falling in love. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she'd fallen asleep on the couch the night before with a book about animal husbandry in her lap. Everything about her felt like it belonged in his life. He was just working up the courage to tell her how he felt when their peaceful world came crashing down. It was a Tuesday morning in late March. Jake was in the barn fixing a broken stall door when he heard Ranger start barking. Not his usual bark when someone drove up, but the aggressive bark he saved for real threats. Jake dropped his tools and walked to the barn door, and his blood turned to ice. 3 men were getting out of a black SUV that had just pulled up to his house. Even from a distance, Jake could tell they didn't belong here. City clothes, expensive shoes that weren't made for walking on dirt and gravel. The kind of men who looked like they were used to getting what they wanted, no matter what it took. The man in the lead was tall and lean with slicked back hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He moved like a predator, confident and dangerous. Jake knew without being told that this was Vincent. Maria must have seen them too, because she came running out of the house, her face white with terror. "Jake," she called out, her voice high and scared. "That's him. That's Vincent." Jake stepped out of the barn and walked toward the house, putting himself between Maria and the 3 men. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face calm. In his experience, men like this fed on fear. "You must be the cowboy," Vincent said, his voice smooth as silk with just a hint of an accent. "Nice place you got here. Real private." "I can see." Why Maria thought she could hide here. "This is private property," Jake said, his voice steady. "You need to leave." Vincent laughed, and the sound made Jake's skin crawl. "I don't think you understand the situation, friend. Maria has something. That belongs to me, and I've come to collect it." "I don't belong to anyone," Maria said. Stepping up beside Jake, her voice was shaking, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "Oh, sweetheart," Vincent said, and his voice turned cold. "You know things, you've seen things. That makes you mine whether you like it or not." Jake could see the other 2 men spreading out, trying to flank them. One of them had his hand inside his jacket, and Jake was pretty sure it wasn't because he was cold. "She's under my protection," Jake said. "And you're going to get back in your car and leave, now?" Vincent's fake smile disappeared. Or what, cowboy? You going to shoot us? 3 against 1 doesn't seem like good odds. Who says it's 3 against 1? Came a voice from behind them. Jake turned and felt a surge of relief. Tom Bradley, his elderly neighbor, was walking up the driveway with his own rifle in his hands. Behind him came Carl Peterson from the next ranch over and his son Danny. Word traveled fast in ranch country, and neighbors looked out for each other. "Seems like you boys are lost," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd been dealing with troublemakers for 70 years. "GPS can be tricky out here in the country." Vincent looked around, calculating the odds. 4 armed ranchers. Who knew the territory against 3 city boys who were a long way from home? The math didn't work in his favor. "This isn't over," he said to Maria, his voice full of menace. "You can't hide forever. I'll find you, and when I do, your cowboy friends won't be able to help you." "We'll see about that," Jake said quietly. Vincent stared at him for a long moment, then jerked his head toward his men. They got back in their SUV and drove away, but Jake could see Vincent watching Maria through the rear window until they disappeared around the bend. "Thank you," Jake said to his neighbors. "That's what neighbors do," Tom replied. "But son, this isn't over. Men like that don't give up easy?" Jake looked at Maria, who was shaking despite the warm afternoon sun. He put his arm around her shoulders and felt her lean into him. "I know," he said, "but we'll be ready." After Vincent and his men left, Jake knew they'd be back. Men like that didn't make threats they didn't intend to keep. That evening, he sat Maria down at the kitchen table and laid out a plan. "We need to contact the sheriff," he said. "And we need to be smart about this." Maria shook her head. "Jake, you don't understand. Vincent has connections everywhere. He told me once that he had people in law enforcement on his payroll. What if the sheriff is one of them? Sheriff Rodriguez has been keeping the peace in this county for 15 years, Jake said. "I've known him since high school. He's one of the good ones." It took some convincing, but Maria finally agreed. Jake called the sheriff's office on his emergency radio, the same one his father had used to report cattle thieves and medical emergencies. Within an hour, Sheriff Rodriguez was sitting in their living room listening to Maria's story with the kind of attention that told Jake his trust had been well placed. "Miss Santos," the sheriff said when she finished, "what you're describing sounds like organized crime. This is bigger than what my small department can handle alone, but I have contacts with the FBI who specialize in this kind of thing." "The FBI?" Maria looked scared. "I don't know if I'm ready for all that." "You might not have a choice," Sheriff Rodriguez said gently. "If this Vincent character is involved in drug trafficking and money laundering like you say, then you're not just a witness, you're evidence. They'll keep coming for you until they silence you permanently." Jake felt his hands clench into fists. The idea of anyone hurting Maria made something dark and protective rise up in his chest. "What do we do in the meantime?" Jake asked. "You keep doing exactly what you're doing," the sheriff said. "Stay alert, stick together, and call me if they come back. I'm going to post a deputy on the main road, and I'll have patrol cars make regular sweeps past your place." 3 days passed without incident. Jake and Maria fell back into their routine, but the easy piece they'd found was gone. Every unexpected sound made them both jump. Every car engine in the distance made Jake reach for his rifle. Maria tried to hide her fear, but Jake could see it in the way she'd look over her shoulder when they were outside, the way she'd freeze whenever Ranger barked. On the 4th night Vincent made his move, Jake woke up to Ranger growling low in his throat. The dog was standing at the bedroom window, his hackles raised. Jake had moved Maria into the guest room down the hall after the first visit, but tonight he'd insisted she sleep in his room while he took the couch. Something in his gut had told him trouble was coming. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, getting up and looking out the window. At first, he didn't see anything. The yard was dark except for the light from the full moon. Then he caught movement. By the barn. 3 figures moving carefully between the buildings. They were trying to surround the house. Jake grabbed his hunting rifle and his cell phone. He quickly texted the emergency number Sheriff Rodriguez had given him, then crept down the hall to wake Maria. "They're here," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. "Stay low and stay quiet." Maria was instantly awake, her eyes wide but focused. "How many?" "3 that I can see, maybe more." They made their way to the living room, staying below the windows. Jake could hear footsteps on the front porch now, trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. City boys, he thought. They didn't know how to move silently on old wooden boards. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. They were coming in through the back door. "Jake Morrison," Vincent's voice called out from somewhere in the house. "We know you're here. We just want Maria. Send her out and nobody gets hurt." Jake positioned himself behind his father's old recliner, using it for cover while keeping his rifle pointed toward the kitchen doorway. Maria crouched behind the couch, and Jake could hear her breathing, quick and shallow but controlled. "The only thing you're getting is a ride back to town with the sheriff," Jake called back. Vincent laughed. "The sheriff's 40 miles away, cowboy. By the time he gets here, this will all be over." That's when Jake heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Car engines, multiple vehicles, coming up his driveway fast. Sheriff Rodriguez hadn't come alone. "Sounds like you might be wrong about that," Jake said. The front door exploded open, and suddenly the house was full of law enforcement officers. "FBI, everyone on the ground." What happened next was over in minutes but felt like hours. Shouting, confusion, the sound of men being handcuffed. Vincent had been caught completely off guard. He'd expected to find a scared woman and an isolated rancher, not a coordinated law enforcement operation. When the dust settled, Sheriff Rodriguez found Jake and Maria in the living room. "You two okay?" he asked. "We're fine," Jake said, though his hands were still shaking with adrenaline. "Good, because Special Agent Williams here needs to talk to Miss Santos about testifying in a federal case." The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, and paperwork. It turned out that Vincent was wanted in connection with a multi-state drug trafficking operation. Maria's testimony, combined with evidence they gathered from his phone and computer, was enough to put him away for a very long time. As the sun came up over the mountains, Jake and Maria sat on their front porch, watching the last of the FBI vehicles drive away. "It's really over," Maria said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "It's over," Jake confirmed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. Finally, Maria spoke up. "I need to tell you something," she said. "These past few weeks living here with you, it's been the happiest I've ever been. Not just because I was safe, but because of you." Jake turned to look at her. In the morning light, with her hair messy from the night's drama and wearing his old flannel shirt, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "I love you," he said, the words coming out easier than he'd expected. "I love you too," she replied, and when she smiled, Jake felt like the sun had just come up inside his chest. 6 months later, Maria was enrolled in an online nursing program, studying at the kitchen table where she'd first told him her story. She'd also started helping Jake expand the ranch operation, using some of the reward money from Vincent's arrest to buy better equipment and improve the facilities. The wedding was small, just family and a few close friends held right there on the ranch under the same mountains where they'd found each other. Tom Bradley walked Maria down the aisle since her father couldn't make the trip from Arizona. Sheriff Rodriguez served as best man, joking that he'd never had a case with such a happy ending. 2 years later, their daughter Katie was born on a warm spring morning, with Dr. Harrison making the trip out from town to attend the birth. Maria had established a small medical clinic in town by then, serving the rural community she'd grown to love. The ranch that had once been silent now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the sound of Katie's first attempts at words. Jake would sometimes stand on his front porch in the evening, listening to Maria sing lullabies in the house behind him, and marvel at how much his life had changed. He'd spent 8 years convinced that solitude was his destiny, that the ranch was meant to be a lonely place. But sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, in the form of a broken-down car and a woman brave enough to ask for help. Maria had been running from danger when she found his ranch, but she'd also been running toward something. she didn't even know she was looking for. A place to belong, a man who would love and protect her, and a chance to build the life she'd always dreamed of. And Jake? He'd found something even more precious than he'd imagined. He'd found home in a person, not just a place.